Welcome. Today we are going to build this speaking clock using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So without wasting any time, let's go straight and start. So on my desktop, I'm going to create a folder and I'm simply going to call this clock. Now I'm going to open this folder with my code editor. If you're on Windows, you can simply right click on this folder and open it with your code editor. If you're on Mac, you can simply open your Visual Studio Code or any code editor you are using, and then you can drag and drop this folder. So now this is the folder, which is the current project folder on our code editor. In here, we need to add a file, and I'm going to call this index.html. So with the help of Emmet, I'm going to generate the HTML boilerplate, and let's change the title to clock. So inside the body, I'm going to add a div, and I'm going to give this a class of board. And in this, I'm going to add another div with a class of clock. So next, I'm going to add another div with a class of background. And this is going to be a div without a content. So next, we are going to add the second end, the minute end, and the hour end. So they are also going to be divs, but with no any content. So I'm going to have div.hour end. So the next one is going to be the minute end. And last, I'm going to have a div with a class of second end. Now we need to consider the numbers. So I'm going to add a div, and this is going to have a class of number, and I'm going to simply multiply this by 4, and this will generate 4 divs for me. So here I'm going to write 12. This is gonna be 3. This is gonna be 6, and the last one is going to be 9. And in here, I'm going to give it a different class, like an additional class of number 12. This also, I'm going to give additional class of number 3. The same thing here, and also the last one. So we are done with the clock session. The next thing we need to do is to add a button, so that when we click on this button, it's simply going to tell us what the time is. So let's add a div, and this should have a class of pronouns. So let this be pronouns button wrapper. And in here now we can add a button, and let's give this button a class of pronouns button. Here we can simply say pronouns time. And we are done with the HTML. So let's simply run this code and see what we have. I'm going to be using an extension called the Lifesaver. So you can click on these extensions, and here simply search for Lifesaver. Click on the first option, and here you just have to install. I already have it installed. So once you install that, you're going to see an icon, which is this Go Live icon. Click on this Go Live, and now we have our web page containing our clock. So the next thing is to style this page. And for the styles, I'm going to be using an external CSS, which implies that we are going to add an additional file here, which I'm going to call style.css. So next, let's link the two files. So we go to our index.html. We can close this for now. So on the head section, let's use the link element, and let's bring in our style.css. First, we are going to check if this works. Here, let's just add the color. And for now, let's just say red. Good. And now we can style this page because we see that everything is working. So let's remove this color. And for the body, we're going to give it a display of flares. And let's justify content to the center because we want everything to be at the center of the page. And let's align items to the center. Let's give it a margin of 0. And next, we need to give it a height, and we want the height to be the full height. So we can simply use the 100 viewport height. And let's give it, for now, we don't need the background color, so we can see what we are doing. So now we have this. Now let's go to our HTML and open this. So now we can grab this board and style the board. And remember, it's a class selector, so we have to use dots, and that should be dot board. And for the board, we are going to give it a width and height of, let's say, 400 pixels. So let's make it display flex, and let's justify content to the center. Let's align items to the center. Let's save this and see what we have. So now we see that we have to push this pronounce time back to the bottom. And that is simply by changing the flex direction. So let's change the flex direction. So the flex direction should be colon. And when you save this file, you simply have this. Next, let's give this a boss shadow. So let's use a boss shadow. And for the horizontal offset, this should be 0. Vertical should be 0. And this should be 20 pixels. And now let's add a color. So let's use the RGBA because we simply want everything to be 0. But we need to add a transparency of, and now we have this. Let's give this a border radius. So let's add a border radius. And this should simply be 20 pixels. And this is not bad. We are going to make it position relative. So back in our HTML code, the next thing we have here is the clock. So let's start the clock. And for the clock, we want to reduce the width. Let's give it a width of 300 pixels. Also, the height should be the same thing. So this should be 300 pixels. Let's also give it a boss shadow. And for the horizontal offset is going to be 0. Vertical is going to be 0. So this is going to be 30 pixels. And also we are going to use the RGBA because we need the transparency. For the red is going to be 0. For the green is going to be 0. For blue is going to be 0. And the transparency for the alpha, let's use 0.1. And now we have this. So we need to make this circular. So here we can add a border radius of 50%. So that is going to turn it to a circle. Now you see that the numbers are off this clock. So first we are going to give this clock a position of relative. And then we are going to add an overflow and we're going to set this to hidden for now. Next, let's grab this background. So let's style this empty div here. So let's style this. So here, let's add our background. For the background, we're going to make it position absolute. So it's basically going to be on this circle. So let's simply do that first. The position should be absolute, and let the width and height also should be the full width of the circle. In this case, we are going to use 100%, and also the height should be 100%. Okay, and the top should be 0, left should be 0, and now we need to add a background image. So let's add a background. In this case, we are going to use the linear gradient. For the linear gradient, let's use 45 degrees for the direction of the gradient line. So here we need to add 45 degrees. And now let's add the color stop. So for this, I'm going to use the full red, which is FF. Then let's use 5F and 6D because we want something like pink. And also let's add another color stop, and this should be FF. And let's add let's use C3, and this should be 7-1. So it's going to be this mixture here. So next we need to add animation, and for our animation we are going to use a keyframe. So here let's simply add keyframes, and let's call this rotate background. And for the rotate background, so the 0% here is going to be transform, and this is going to rotate 0 degrees. So we are going to start from 0 degree, and for the 100%, we are now going to transform to 360 degrees. So we move from 0 degrees to 360 degrees. And here now we need to add this keyframe. So you can copy this keyframe, you add it here. Now let's add the time. So here it should be 60 seconds, and let's add a linear, and this is simply going to be infinite. So the next thing, let's go back to our file. So for the hour earned out here, so dot, so let's select both the hour and the minutes, and also the second end. So for this tree, remember we made the clock position relative. So now we need to make this position absolute. And now let's add a transform, and this should be transform origin. And this here we need to add bottom, and this should be at the center. So now we need to style each of these and. So let's grab the first one, and for the hour and, let's give it a width. So the width should be 8 pixels. Let's also give it a height. Let's give it a border radius of 5 pixels. So let's give it a background color of 333. So for the left, we need to do some calculation. So it's going to be the center, so 50%. And now we are going to remove 4 pieces. The bottom is going to be 50% because it's simply going to be at the middle. And let's add a background color to be 333. For this, the Z index is going to be 3. So this should be minute end, not hour end. Okay, so now let's do the same for the minute end. And for the minutes, we are going to make the width a little bit smaller. So this should be 6 pixels, and the height should be actually longer than the hour end. So this should be 120 pixels. Let's give it a border radius of 5 pixels. And now we need to calculate the left. For the minute end is simply going to be 50%. And here let's simply subtract 3 pixels because the minute end is always longer than the hour end. So here we are going to write 3 pixels. And the bottom should be 50%. And also let's give it a background color of, let's say, in this case, let's say 555. And now let's add a Z index, and the Z index should be 2 because this should be above the hour end. So for the left, we are going to use the calculate. So this should be 50% minus, here we subtracted 4 pieces, and the minute is always longer than the hour end. So here we are going to subtract 3 pieces. And for the border radius, we are going to use the same 5 pieces. And this simply means that we are repeating ourselves. Remember dry code. We are going to refactor this very soon. So the bottom is going to be 50%. and let's give it a background color. In this case, let's use 555, and the Z index be 2 because this should be above the hour end. Now let's save this file and see what happens. Actually, something strange is happening. So let's go back to this code. Okay, so where we used the calculation, make sure you add a space. So here you simply need to add a space. Save this file, and now we have this. This is the minutes earned, and we also have our hour earned. So let's try the last one, which is the second earned. And for this, let's add a width because we want this to be more tiny. So, and it should be longer than the remaining two. So this should be 140 pieces. And now we need to add a border radius of 5 pieces. And for the left, we are now going to use the same calculation, and it's going to be 50%, which is the center. And we are going to subtract 2 pieces. And remember to add a space here. So the bottom is also going to be 50%. Let's use 777. So let's save this. Now we have this, but we need to give this also a Z index. And as you would have guessed, this should be 1. Now looking at this code, we can actually write more dry code. Here we already selected all these classes. So we need to stop repeating ourselves because here we are using the same bottom here. So let's remove this from here and add it here. I think also with the border radius, we are using the same thing. So we can simply also remove it from these 2 places. So now let's undo the numbers. So here we can simply grab the number. And for the number, we are also going to make it position absolute so that it's going to be on this particular clock, which is positioned relative. So now let's add a font size of, let's use 14 pieces. Let's add a font width. Let's simply use bold because we are not using any font. And for the color, let's use 333. So for this, let's give it a top. For the 12, we can actually use top of 20 pieces. And for the left, we need to calculate this. So left should simply be, so here, let's use calculate. And this should be 50%. And here we are going to subtract 8 pieces. And now you can see 12 on the clock. The next thing, so we have 12. So 12 and 6 are like somehow opposite. So we can simply grab this particular code and just do a little change. So here, let's add this. For 12, the top is 20 pieces. So for 6, instead of writing top, we are going to change the top to bottom. But now let's twist this a little bit. So let's just remove 10. So let's go to the next number, and this now should be 3. So for 3, we need to calculate the top and the right because the 3 should be here. So for the right, we simply need to use 20 pieces. This should be okay for the right. But for the top, we need to calculate this. So for the top, and this now should be 50% minus 10 pieces. So that will give us the 3, but now we need to add a space and a space. So this will give us 3. And for 9, which is just opposite 3, we need to do something similar. So instead of right, we are going to simply change this to left. The only thing remaining is this particular pronounce time, this button here. But before that, let's actually go back to the body and let's add the background color. For the body, simply need to add a background color. And here, I think we should use 2 to 2. And now we have this. Okay, so the last thing we need to style is just the pronouns button wrapper. So let's grab that. We can simply grab that from here, which is this. So now we have this, and this also is going to be positioned absolute. Okay, and let's push it a little bit down. So the bottom should be, let's say, 5 pixels. The left should be 50% because we want this to be at the center. And now we can use transform. Let's translate this back to minus 50%. And that should be at the center. Now let's style the button itself, and that is the pronouns button. We simply need to add the padding, and the top and bottom should be 10 pixels, then left and right should be 20 pixels. Okay, and that looks a little bit better. Let's increase the font size. Let's say 16 pixels. Okay, I think that is a little bit okay. Move the border, should be none. And let's add the border radius. So let's use 5 pixels. Let's change the background color and let's use 333. Okay, now let's change the color of the text, and here we can use F5, F5, F5. So we have this. Let's change the cursor pointer. That we now have this here. We need to add an over effect. So when you hover on this button, so we can simply grab this and let's use a pseudo selector. So here, let's use over. So when you hover on this, we simply just want to change the background, and we are going to change the background to 555. So now we have something like this. I think this is already cool. Let's go straight to the JavaScript. And that means we need to create another file, and this is going to be called script.js. So also we need to link this, we need to bring it in our HTML file. You can either add it here in the head, or you add it before the closing tag of the body element. So I'm going to add this here, just right after the CSS. I'm going to add the script, and here we need to add the source, and this should be our script.js. Very important, we need to add the flair so that it's going to read our HTML document before reading the script.js file. So now let's go straight to the script.js file. So what we want to do is to make sure this moves correctly. So we need the hour end. So let's grab this and let's call this the hour end. And let's this be document dot. So we can use document.query selector so that we can now select using the class, in this case, the hour end. So we are going to do the same thing for the remaining two. So let's simply close this for now. And we are simply going to copy this line of code and paste it here. And you have to change this to minute. And this, we change it to second. And here, this is going to be minutes. And finally, this is going to be second. So now all we need to do is to simply write a simple function that is going to rotate the clock hand. So in here, first, we need to know what the date is. So we need to know today's date. So we use the date object in this simple project. So here we can just call new date, and this will give us today's date. Then from this date object, we can now get the hours to be date.get. So here we can get the hours. But we need to make sure that the hours actually within the range of 0 and 11, because as you can see, we have 3 C's, we don't have anything like 24 on this clock. So here we need to use the modulus and we need to write 12. So this will ensure that the hours are between the range of 0 to 11. So next we need to get the minutes, and we are going to do almost the same thing. This should be get minutes, and the last one should be the second, and this also is going to be date.getSeconds. All right, now we need to define the rotation of each of these and let's call this hour rotation. And this hour rotation, so this is simply going to be hours, and we're going to multiply these hours by 30. So this is because we have 360 degrees, and 360 divided by 12 will simply give us 30. So now we need to add a little fine-tuned based on the minutes rotation, based on the minutes. So this is going to be plus minutes, which is this here, multiplied by 0.5. And basically we are going to do the same thing for the minute rotation. So this is going to be minutes. So instead of multiply by 30, this is going to be 360 divided by 60. So here we are going to have 360 divided by 60, which is going to give us 6. And now we also need to add a little fine-tuned adjustment based on the second. So in this case, we are going to add seconds, and this is going to be multiplied by 0.1. And next, let's add the second rotation. And this is simply going to be seconds multiplied by 6, because each second is equivalent to 360 divided by 60. So the next thing we need to do is now to take the hour hand, which is this here. So we are getting the hour hand using document.querySelector. So we are accessing this hour hand here. So let's get the style, and we want to use the transform property. And for this transform, we simply want it to transform based on our calculations here. So we can simply use this. So here we simply write rotate, just like what we did in the keyframe here. So if you go back to the keyframe here, it's just like what we did here. So we want to do this using JavaScript based on the calculation from the minutes, second, and hour. So here we can now add a $sign in order to add the JavaScript code in here. So here we need to add our hour rotation, and outside here we need to add the degree. So we do basically the same thing for the remaining hand. So let's paste this here, and this is going to be minutes, and instead of hour rotation is going to be minutes rotation, and this is going to be, instead of hour rotation, is going to be second rotation. And now what we have to do is to use the set time out. So this should be second hand. So now we need to use the set time out. And set time out actually takes a callback function just like this. And after this callback function, we need to add the number of time, that is the time out. And this particular function here is going to be this rotate clock ends itself. So here we just pass our rotate clock ends. So that means this function will be called after every delay of 1 second. So now we need to call this function. So in here, we need to now call this function and save this file. So you see our clock is working correctly. So the next thing we need to do is actually when we click this button, we want to hear what the time is. So we need to go back to our HTML and we need to grab this pronounce button. So here also we need to add const. So let's call this pronounce button, and let this be document.querySelector. Okay, so just after this, let's now add the pronounce button. So this pronounce button that we defined here, let's add an event listener, because in this case we want it when this is clicked. So here we're going to add an event listener, and is going to be the click event. So this also takes a callback function, and in this callback function we now need to define exactly what we want. First, let's get today's date. So let's get the date. Note that we are repeating ourselves already, but for now, let's get this date. And also, let's get the hours. So for the hours, is going to be date.getHours. So we do the same thing like before, but in this case, we are going to add or 12. So it's either it gets the hour or it gives us 12. Also, let's get the minute, and for the minute is going to be date.getMinute, and that is all we need. So next we need to add the hour test. So the hour test is simply going to be hours, so which is this. If hours is equal to 1, we want the hours test. So we check if the hours, so if the value here is 1, then the test should simply say hour singular. But if the value is not 1, it should say hours. And we do the same thing for the minutes test, and you are going to see why we are doing this. So this is simply going to check if this minute, so if the minute is equal to 1, it should just simply say minutes. Otherwise, it should say minutes. And this is JavaScript ternary operator. So instead of using if statement, we could simply use this shorthand. So here we are going to use the JavaScript speech synthesis utterance. So here let's write the new. So it is going to be the speech synthesis, this particular one. In here, we simply need to write exactly what we want to hear when we click the pronounce time. So here I can just say, hello, the time is, so let's use this to pass in our JavaScript code, and this should be the hour. So the time is, we write the hours, so hours. And now we need to add the hour test. So we do the same, and this now should be our test. And now let's also add the minute. So here we need to pass the minutes, and also we pass the minute test. So here the minute test. Okay, so the last thing we have to do is to now use the speech synthesis. And this speech synthesis has a method called speak. So we invoke this speak, and we are going to pass in what exactly we want it to say, which is this speech. So now when you save this file and go back to this page, when you click on this,
the time is 12 hours and 0 minutes.
It tells you exactly what the time is. So this is the end of this project. Please, if you have any question, simply drop your question in the comment section, and don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. Thank you and bye.